Good morning and welcome back to World Talks. Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are set to meet Ukrainian negotiators on Sunday, following a weekend marked by drone strikes on two Russian oil tankers and continued deadly attacks on Kyiv. On Monday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte will host Ukraine's Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal at NATO's headquarters in Brussels in a closed press meeting, likely centered on the U.S. peace proposal. The city simultaneously holds the Foreign Affairs Council session, addressing military support for Ukraine and the implementation of NATO's Defense Readiness Roadmap 2030. To discuss all this, I'm joined by Wierenga, lecturer in International Relations, Baltic Defense College. Good morning, Luis. Delighted to have you with us.
Good morning. It's great to be back with TVP World.
So let's start with the Ukraine peace plan. Let me quote a headline from the Wall Street Journal. The Kremlin pitched the White House on peace through business. To Europe's dismay, the president and his envoy are on board. What do you think about this statement?
Well, I think that there are a lot of things that are still moving, and there are a lot of things that are really unknown, especially considering the process of the envoy. So Steve Witkoff is the Middle East envoy. Retired General Keith Kellogg was the envoy to Ukraine. So as such, there was no, envoy to Russia, which maybe is good in terms of wordage, but it has been Witkoff that's largely been behind the 28-point peace plan, as well as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's also the acting Security Council head. And of course, the CIA director has been at least involved at some point. But there's been a lot of confusion because my understanding is that, Steve Witkoff's office is in the White House, his team is in the State Department, and there's kind of a lack of understanding about talking points during the process that led up to this. Now, the document, the 28-point plan here, it's basically trying to curb Ukraine's military power once Russia's war of aggression ends. And, there's not much of anything that benefits Ukraine. So, for example, no foreign troops could be allowed on Ukrainian soil. Planes used by foreign diplomats couldn't really fly into Ukrainian airspace, which makes one ask the question, okay, what are Russia's intentions once the war of aggression ends? But I think first and foremost, Ukraine, rightly so, is not on board with this. And there are, as you mentioned in the introduction to the segment, Secretary Rubio is meeting with the Ukrainian delegation in Geneva to further discuss this. So it could be that this is just, as you said, negotiations through business, which is a very different way of doing diplomacy, and it's a departure from the way that the United States has done this in the past, and that comes at a time where this is arguably the most important and most crucial bit of diplomacy right now to actually get a real concrete end, a just end to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. So let's stop for a moment on Witkoff-Trump relationship. I mean, how important is Steve Witkoff? You've mentioned that his role is kind of nebulous, but still he is quite important. And recently those recordings came out, right? So let's talk about this for a moment, please.
Well, he's somebody who can get the job done in the president's eyes. He comes from a very similar background. They're both in real estate. And I mean, if you look at the president's how he conducts himself as president, I always tell when I'm giving guest lectures or talks that it's important to look at the careers that he's had in his lifetime. And the first one is as a real estate magnate in a very cutthroat and tough environment in New York City. The second is a reality TV star. And the third is a politician. For basically a decade, he's been in this role right now. And so Steve Witkoff is somebody who was out of politics. He was very much in the real estate world, and he's very much a Trump ally and a Trump loyalist. And if you compare the two different administrations, Trump 1.0, Trump 2.0, they're comprised of very different people. And not to get into too much into the domestic issues going on in the United States right now, but I think it is important to look at why this person was picked. And I think that, the president does see that this is not going to be an easy negotiation when you're going up against Putin and his FSB crowd that are clearly not going to budge and that have clearly decided that they were going to try and take the Trump administration on a joyride in hopes that they would get the strategic victory that was decided by the two countries without Ukraine and without Europe. But I also see the other end of that, and I don't think, I mean, the 28-point plan has been heavily criticized because, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to curb Ukraine's power. It's an attempt to curb Ukraine's power. But there are some positives, for example, Ukraine not being in such a desperate position that they need to agree to such terms. And getting back to Witkoff, nobody really knows how much this was circulated within the Trump administration. So maybe he just has, free reign to make these types of deals. So it'll be interesting to see what the Europeans collectively decide. And in that, I do include Ukraine in Europe. I should just mention that.
And what outcomes are you expecting from these talks in DC? I mean, President Zelensky seemed hopeful.
Well, as I mentioned, Ukraine is not in such a desperate position that they really need to agree to terms that would essentially punish them after this. And I think that this is going to be a feat of strength in diplomacy as European leaders meet, both with President Zelensky and amongst themselves in an EU format. But there are also a lot of things that are coming out of European allies very, very recently, where I think that this is the first stage in Europe collectively saying enough with all of the Russian hybrid threats, not even threats, attacks. So, for example, the Italian defense minister came out with a 125-page plan to retaliate against the hybrid attacks that are becoming more frequent and more severe. And other politicians and ministers and policy thinkers have actually said, okay, we need to do things like, for example, the Polish foreign minister, all countries need to revise their security procedures. Some countries are strengthening rules about shooting down drones that are flying over airports. And I think that this is going to be the first time where hybrid threats that are more and more aggressive in nature are actually addressed with a common understanding that, in order to actually deter Russia, in order to actually make them stop, more strength needs to be behind the punch. And I think Europe's getting ready to do that. And I think a lot of the motivation for that, you can put a lot of this on the Ukrainians. They have not given up. They have not allowed Russia to break their spirit. They have not allowed Russia to take over their country, and they continue to fight against all odds. And I think that does have a very motivating effect, even though it is a very ominous reason since 2022 when the Russians decided to enact the full-scale war of aggression against Ukraine.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is meeting with Ukraine's Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal. So what do we expect to be on the agenda? And also, given latest concerns about corruption reaching the highest levels of Ukrainian politics, I'm talking about Andriy Yermak, is this likely to be a topic of discussion?
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean, the media was absent from that because, of course, this is a sensitive time for Ukraine, and it arguably couldn't have come at a worse time. And I think it's just really important to remember that all countries face issues like this. This is not something that's specific to Ukraine. It's something that, all countries across the world all face. And so I think that there will be more political and kind of, public support to Ukraine as they continue to struggle during some of the most crucial and potentially final months of at least this phase of the war of aggression that they face. But I think what this is going to, what the main parts of this meeting are going to be, defense support to Ukraine. That's a given. But addition to that, it would be further integration into Euro-Atlantic structures, decision-making impetuses by allied countries, for example. And I think it's just a signal about what NATO's next steps in involving and supporting Ukraine are going to be. I don't think that it's going to be membership at this point in time, but I think it's going to be how to further integrate Ukraine into Euro-Atlantic structures. And I think that there is a roadmap for this. I mean, if we reflect back to 2024 at the Washington summit, at NATO's 75th anniversary anniversary summit, the metaphor, a bridge to membership, was put out. Well, we haven't heard that metaphor since there was a change in administration and some other things in the United States. And of course, that will be a 32-member consensus-based decision. But I think that the topic won't be so much membership in NATO per se, but integration into structures, further support, further financial support. I mean, there's, the Ramstein group just met, and Ukraine's partners announced that there was going to be more defense support, hundreds of millions of dollars. Germany alone provided, I think, 400 million, something around that number. So I think it's just going to be what they can do to really provide quick support, decisive support, and make sure that Ukraine knows that whatever is going on in these negotiations, that Europe is going to be there, and that they need to expedite the process because of how dire the circumstances are right now.
Right. And speaking of support, also on Monday, there will be a Foreign Affairs Council meeting in Brussels. The representatives are supposed to discuss military support for Ukraine and also the Defense Readiness Roadmap 2030. What is this framework? What does it entail?
Well, I think right now the big thing is putting more and more pressure on Russia. It looks like disrupting the shadow fleet is arguably at the top of that agenda. Right now, Russian crude oil and the export of their crude oil is lower than it has been in several months. And their tax revenues from this are at the lowest, arguably, since the second phase of their war of aggression against Ukraine started. So it is obvious that the sanctions are hitting Russia, and there are more and more that are coming. So I think it's kind of like, let's not take our finger off the pulse. Let's keep going. Let's disrupt them, and let's finally just hit them where it hurts, because playing it cautiously. Well, this is actually cautious because this is a language that they understand. But being more and more assertive and really going after everything that gives them revenue to stop, their war of aggression is going to be high on the agenda. So, for example, I think that the shadow fleet will likely dominate that, as will financial support for Ukraine. I think that hybrid attacks, very recently this month, Poland's railway network was attacked. There was a study that between, I think, a 6-month period, there were like 110 hybrid attacks in Europe, most of them against Poland and France. So that's inevitably got to be on the agenda. But I think that the big thing about the roadmap, the 2030 plan, is that everyone needs to be equipped, everyone needs to be interoperable, and everyone needs to be on the same page. And there needs to be some common understanding of how AI and technology are going to be interwoven. So what tools for what? How do we spend the money that we've agreed to spend? And I think that in the past, a lot of these things have been laid out, and there's been a timeline that's taken time. Now, the roadmap is 2030. That's half of a decade away, but still, I think that in the past month, since at least September, moving between September and November of this year, the understanding has been that we don't have time, and we have to figure out a way to move quickly while still adhering to our values. And these are we've talked about several very, very high profile meetings that are happening like right in these days. And I think that that's what everyone's doing. They're grappling with the issue of time and the issue of urgency.
By all means. And with this, we have to conclude. Luis Wierenga, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be back. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.